Because I think there was some criticism of the film tax credit in Peter's comments.
I'm glad I decided not to bring Cameron Diaz this afternoon, because she would have been offended by something. It was a good decision on my part. Just to comment on one of the issues that Professor Enrich brought up is this argument about the sound stages in the studios, and that has been around since the beginning of the credit. And my background in the private sector, where I spent most of my career, is in the real estate development area. And I was dubious from the beginning, and I looked at New Mexico and other places. And then we had this Hollywood East phenomenon that was going to happen in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And its financing underpinnings were dubious at best and turned out to be even worse than they looked at first glance. So I must say that I never felt that we would head in that direction, that we would see significant capital investment in facilities that would be a result of the credit. I also learned from the industry that it's pretty easy to turn a warehouse into a soundstage, and we have a lot of warehouses around. And when films are being made here, they adapt, they find places to do interior work very readily. So I think that is a false argument. I agree with you on that. That has been put forth in other jurisdictions as to what happens eventually. I get back to Massachusetts is different. We compete pretty effectively with those 45 other states, even though our credit, generous though it may be, is in the middle range of those being offered. And that's because of the talent we have here, and that's because of the people who are being turned out by our universities and who are entering this industry in its broadest definition. And we've talked a lot about feature films here, but documentaries. WGBH turns out more programming than any other public television station in the country. Commercials. We do a lot of advertising. There's some major advertising and commercial firms here. And then this new digital media focus, which is an area where we do seem to be on the cutting edge with a lot of the academic programs. And so the rationale to me has always been, let's go with our strengths. That's what we've tried to do with the other incentives that we put forward in this administration and the Patrick administration. And I see this as an area of strength where we can compete effectively because we have a credit, but also because of what we offer in terms of not only people, but of settings here in the Commonwealth. Without a credit, given this rush to the bottom, we were not doing a lot of business in this area, some, but not a lot. And I do think that without the credit, it would drop off dramatically again. It is, I think the first study was 3 years, and it was a gear-up period. We just really got going in the third year. I am looking forward to this new DOR study to see where we are now, but I think the jury's still out, and that I would, for one, argue, and I think if the governor is reelected, which I hope he will be on November 2nd, get out and vote, that this will be an experiment that will continue for the second term, as we see if there is more of a long-term development of supportive services in this industry. I do know that in the periods of 08 heading into 09, staff was moving very quickly from one film to the next. We had so much activity. We did have something you referred to. The Back Bay stood in for Paris, which I really liked, because you know how much that would offend the Parisians. That was in Pink Panther 2. And a room in the State House was the Vatican. There is no less holy place than the State House, and I think being the Vatican was quite a moment that got some of the legislators thinking a little bit, which is probably a good thing. But we were getting films that didn't use our real backdrops, our real streetscapes and cityscapes here in Massachusetts, not just because of the credit, because they could have gotten more elsewhere, but I think because of the talent pool that had been identified and was readily available.
Great. let's open it up for some questions and comment. I want to, though, before I do that, take 20 seconds to add one thing that neither of you really talked about. You touched on it, Dan, and that is there is this kind of amorphous thing called business climate. And historically, Massachusetts has had, at least according to many commentators, a poor business climate. That is, this is not a place that corporations want to race to come and set up new businesses. There's at least one ranking now that says that we're now 5th best in the country. CNBC did a thing on the side. Doubt if it's very scientific, but it does suggest that we have turned our business climate around. And I guess one question that I would raise, and maybe we could discuss it, is if part of becoming a good business climate is to waste a lot of money on film credits, but it helps to change the business climate so that you get lots of investment in lots of different industries, not just film, would the cost-benefit calculations come out differently? I'm not sure they would, but it's the kind of thing that we may want to think about as well, the overall business climate. John?
My question has, I think you make a very compelling case about all of the other assets and competitive advantages we have that would, in addition to the film credit, draw movie production here. If that's the case, could we experiment with a lower, more modest tax credit, let's say 10% or 15%, that would be, most states would have more generous than that, but we might nonetheless win productions because of our other advantages, and by having it be only 10% or 15%, it changes the cost-benefit equation, changes the $94 or whatever $1,000, so that we odds are we probably would have fewer productions, but maybe that's okay. And Professor Enrich, I wonder what you would think if, rather than getting rid of it, which I think would be what you favor, how would you feel if it were just lower to 10% or something?
So we didn't experiment with lowering the credit, but there was a move as we moved into much more difficult budget times at the state in 2008 to cap the credit. And the pipeline of productions dropped off almost immediately because no one knew whether they'd come in under the cap at that point. So I think Professor Enrich did describe this industry very well. They're pirates. They go where the deal is, and I think there would be some sensitivity as to keeping some activity here with a lower credit. But signals are important in the industry. We saw that when there was talk about the cap, and perception of what the climate is going to be is important. So I would argue for staying this course for a little while longer, maybe 4 more years, and see where it takes us in terms of development of jobs in industry supportive activity here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, and I guess my view is, I suspect that in a context where other states are offering incentives that are so wildly out of balance between costs and benefits, that for us to reach a point where we actually could achieve a positive cost-benefit ratio is unrealistic. I mean, in fact, I have never seen any evidence of any tax credit policy, small or large, that came even close to passing a cost-benefit test. And what we probably should talk about at some point is, so what should states be doing that actually is going to have positive economic development effects? And I think we know a fair amount about that, and it has nothing to do with taxes. On Barry's suggestion of business climate, it can't be the case that the Massachusetts Film Tax Credit is what turned around our business climate, since 45 other states are doing it too. I mean, I'm not an empiricist, but it can't work that way.
Well, I wasn't going to suggest that by itself.
Well, but even tax credit policies generally, we're right in the mix with everybody else. The things that I think are driving those business climate perceptions are some of the other things that are not on the tax policy
Let me ask you a question, which is a yes or no, I think. Let's say we eliminate
Hard to
every
avoid.
one.
Wait, the law
eliminated all of our business incentive programs that we have, tax incentive programs, do you think it would have any adverse effect on the quote-unquote business climate?
Depends on the story you tell with it. That's as close to a one-word answer as I can get.
Okay.
Depends also, get rid of the corporate tax.
I'm interested in a question much like Peter's, which is how is it we decide which industries to subsidize? I teach economics and occasionally teach sports economics, where stadium financing is an analogous deal. And I've had Peter's been gracious enough to come to my class more than once, and so I knew what he was going to say today. But you know, the sports stadium issue is one where where operations that are viewed to be important to a municipality or a state are essentially kind of hold up the state for for private advantage in order to the Patriots planned move to Hartford was sort of the best example of a hold up. But this goes on in perhaps less egregious ways in lots of circumstances. But the film industry seems to me, as Peter said, to become an extreme case, because it is one that's extraordinarily mobile, leaves nothing behind. It seems like the epitome of a bad idea. And so the question is twofold. One is why the film industry? What's the genesis of the enthusiasm for subsidizing the film industry? And the second question, and that may be to you, Sir Peter O'Connell, but the second question, maybe I'll try to harass Peter a little bit at least, which is to say, if we had to devise a policy that did some subsidization of this sort, tax subsidies, there should be a list of industries that do have some costs and do provide long-term benefits. Is there not a rational way of going about saying we're going to spend so much money? Let's think about the industries that other states don't subsidize, that will plant themselves here, that will confer some measurable benefits into the future. Could we not do that?
On the first question, but to a word about the sports focus and the stadium subsidies, something we've avoided fairly effectively here in Massachusetts. I was first served in state government when in the Weld administration, when the Crafts were making quite a pitch to have a facility in Boston, and I was the head of Mast Development, the finance authority, and was Governor Weld's point person in the negotiations with them, the discussions with them. And I think we played that one very well here in Massachusetts and continue to do it. There was the press conference in Hartford with Governor Rowland, is that who it was at the time? And he thought he had it made. And we felt through the entire process that there was too much of a tie to Massachusetts in the Kraft family and in their business, their broader business, just not just their sports business, but everything else they were doing here, that they wouldn't pick up and leave, and that this was one where, with a modest infrastructure investment, which is what we ended up making in Foxborough, the kind of infrastructure investment one makes in the normal course of business activity, public safety related, was road improvements. We were able to capture that. So I think Massachusetts has been more judicious than other locales on some of these giveaways, where there's been tremendous public subsidy of white elephant sports facilities around the country. Why did we pick the film industry? I think this creative economy focus caught fire in the transition and caught the attention of the governor in a major way. And the more we looked into the academic programs here, the more we felt like there was a lot of support for the talent pool that could serve this industry, and that might be a draw. It's the same reason I think we went with the major effort on life sciences. On a per capita basis, more NIH funding comes to Massachusetts than any other state. On an absolute basis, 11 cents of every NIH research dollar ends up here. Most of it ends up in a very close proximity to this university. And we felt that with that base to start with, that university teaching hospital base, that additional investment would have a magnified return. and that if we were to get it in sync with a new president who would be coming in who had voiced support for research, that we might get a multiple return on that investment. Again, it's still early days on that, but we continue to do remarkably well in capturing those dollars. So on every new tax incentive initiative that I was involved with in my term of service in government, we tried to find a nexus with our state that was exploitable through the credit, the focus almost always led us to our universities and their programs and trying to capture more of that talent. When Emerson Emerson University, I guess it is now, decided to open a LA campus, we were very troubled by that in government because it was basically saying that we could train them here, but when it came time to get a job, they had to go west. And we really felt like keeping that talent was critical to the future of the state. Barry's done a lot of studies on our workforce here and why our population has been stagnant and what that holds for the future as we have an aging population in the state. And we came to the conclusion that capturing new young talent was a goal that was very important to the future, and develop programs around it.
A couple of observations. First, on the choice of film, I would be surprised if somewhere in your conversations in the transition, when the idea of supporting the film industry came up, whether it wasn't part of what made that feel like a sensible thing to do, that 20 other states, 25 other states had already done it, and so there was you weren't going to be doing something that looked eccentric or wild and crazy. And so I think that's where the imitation thing does, even in thoughtful, intelligent policy discussions, probably plays a role. The life sciences credit is probably a much better example of a well-designed, but both in terms of where it's targeted and the way it's designed. It's done as a competitive program where businesses come in and say, here's what we'll give you if you'll give us this much in tax credit. They have, what is it, $25 million a year of tax credit to award. Yeah. And they only award it to businesses with that make a commitment that the jobs will stay for a 5-year period. If they don't stay for a 5-year period, they can take the credits back. That's a more attractive design for an industry that really has a lot of growth potential. Even there, doing it through tax credits strikes me as probably ill-advised. If you do it instead through preparing the workforce, through providing, and what are the things that really affect business decisions? It's the cost and quality of the workforce, it's access to markets and materials, it's how well regulation is managed. Those are the things that really drive their decisions. And I'd much rather see us putting our money and our efforts into making sure we have the best educated workforce in the country, in the world, making sure we have good infrastructure so people can get in and out, we can get data in and out, and get supplies in and out, make sure we have good public safety, make sure that we have a regulatory system that works for businesses. I think those are the things, those are much better investments.
If I could just do a footnote to the Mast Life Sciences Center, I actually was at the board meeting the other day, just as an observer. One of the first things you see is that, as a matter of fact, they use bond authority to give out loans, which are then repaid with interest.
That's also a better idea.
That works. And the other thing is they actually are giving out grants now for human capital investment. They just gave a $2.5 million grant for the community colleges and the vocational schools to have them buy equipment that they can't otherwise purchase for training young people in life sciences.
Yeah, it's overall a $1 billion program. The tax credits are just a quarter of that, and it probably, again, that's another respect in which it's a better design strategy.
Question over here?
Yes. I mean, we keep coming back to the question, why the film industry? Why are we focusing so much on this? And I think that we need to focus more on what Mr. O'Connell was bringing up, you know, these other factors, not just the straight numbers in this, but saying, look at how media obsessed we are in this country. I'd say that that's a big part of it. There was a comment made previously that movies are made and then they leave and, you know, the state is left as it was, but there is something left, and it's every time someone pops in a DVD, there's this beautiful, you know, picture of Boston, there's the Charles River, there's the schools. I mean, I was 12 years old when Legally Blonde came out. Did I want to go to Harvard Law School after that? Absolutely. And you know, I didn't end up at Harvard, but I'm pretty close, just across the river. And
Here.
yeah, I'm here. But I also, you know, I applied to several other schools. Did I pay the tolls on the way in? Did I buy lunch here? This isn't all just, you know, because of Legally Blonde, but every time that, yes, my entire life isn't based on the movie. However, you know, having all these DVDs in these people's houses, you know, Good Will Hunting, we have The Departed, we have 21, all of these major movies it's like an advertisement for the city, in particular, out of Massachusetts. So how would you respond to that, Professor, looking at...
Well, I just respond by saying that there has been a fair amount of empirical research done on this, and it can't find measurable effects except for very specific types of movies that feature very iconic things about a city. I mean, again, many of the films that are being made in Massachusetts don't even pretend to be in Massachusetts. Many of the what was the film that was about Martha's Vineyard that Roman Polanski made in Europe?
Well, that's
yeah,
because he can't come back.
So I think anecdotally that always comes up. It's interesting that when you actually do the empirical research, it's not measurable. So
I have to
You
confess
also-
that Sydney is a Northeastern co-op student who is working with me this semester. That was not a put out question.
I also think you have to be careful of what movies you get. I mean, I just did see The Town the other night, and I don't think this would be, you know, really attractive to the banking industry. I mean, if we're the bank robbers in the country, why would you come here?
Actually, not need a question.
Well, I guess my question is, what is it that is so appealing to policymakers about tax policy as a development tool as opposed to these other things?
Well, it's a very short answer.
Is it
You don't have to appropriate it. Here's an interesting question. We've called this thing a tax credit, but we are actually paying out money to these folks. But you don't have to go through the appropriation process. It doesn't compete with other priorities in the budget process.
Well,
it's permanent.
Not in the budget process.
Not in the legislators' minds. I mean, it's completely cut off. Yeah.
I think that's absolutely the case. It's, you know, the refundable, transferable nature of this. It sure looks and feels like it's a cash appropriation, but you can hide it, and that's what tax credits do. Is that they hide it in the guise of the credit, and it is not as politically difficult an issue to deal with. You don't have to, and you don't have to face it annually either in the appropriating funds.
Professor Massa.
Peter's comment earlier about the distinction between sort of mobile and less mobile kinds of sectors brings to mind, you know, the idea of the film industry versus, say, an automobile plant in a different era. But brings to mind the fact that, you know, the nature of economic, you know, sort of development in this day and age, where so much of the economic development that we talk about is of brain development, is mind work, where people can literally be anywhere. And so that's an interesting question is how does government, I mean, government traditionally did infrastructure improvements or did direct expenditures for particular industries that were going to build plants or going to build things and with hopes of permanent jobs. Sometimes those just, you know, good luck to Rhode Island investing in Kurt Schilling's operation. You know, it'd be interesting to see how they recapture that. But that's raises an interesting point about the nature of a lot of the jobs that places like Massachusetts seek to develop. A lot of those jobs are highly mobile, in highly mobile sectors that, in fact, they could be anywhere. And in fact, a lot of people who'll be working for companies in Massachusetts will actually be located elsewhere. So how does a state which is very much a fixed thing, and paying costs for fixed entities called residents, deal with mobile nature. Semi-fixed, yeah. Well, think about it, especially the most vulnerable residents are very fixed. So we have fixed costs dealing with the very, so we have this sort of strange world now where we're going to be focusing on economic development for a lot of people who may not actually physically be located here a lot of the time. How do you deal with that?
One of the things that's happened in state government, and it was another area where we was within the purview of the Secretariat, is a redefinition of infrastructure, and broadband is the clearest example of that. And we made a commitment in '07 to get the whole state wired, to be the first state in the country that offered high-speed internet access from every home because of this change in the way people do business and operate. It's particularly important out in the western part of the state where we have a lot of people who work from their homes in creative economy type jobs and also schools and hospitals that just were not connected. We went to Beckett, Mast to make this announcement about universal broadband coverage. Beckett is a beautiful little town that has summer camps and the Jacob's Pillow Dance Company. Those are the two things that I saw there. But even at the town hall, there was there was dial-up. And it made, talk about paper records from the 19th century. Well, the initiative started by the governor, leading to a study, leading to a major grant from the federal government. We are on our way to universal coverage. And I think we will continue to see a redefinition of infrastructure and the government's role in infrastructure as technology develops, because that's how you deal with this mobility and people not working in the traditional office any longer.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Is doing where you should spend state money is on doing things that make the state a place where jobs are going to come. And the broadband thing is a great example, and I think it's a very wise policy. I think the educational system is the other one, and job training and all those related things that are building human capital, which is relatively stable, and if you have that built up, things will come to it.
I just think that I used to work out at Beckett, and I think I just want to talk about tax credits on a micro level for a second, where I spent 5 years working with people with disabilities in job placement, and when you're trying to get employment, we talk about part of the economic is getting the businesses in, the other is getting the businesses to hire some of the people that are most difficult to be employed, and I think you were talking a little bit about that sector. And I will say that the targeted job tax credit, federal tax credit initiative, was probably my most effective tool in getting people hired. And once you get people hired who have been on disability, are in support systems, are in group homes, are in the state, are utilizing resources and tax resources, now they start to develop an income. They no longer need those food stamps. They no longer need, now you're taking them off of subsidies. I would have to say that it was an extremely effective way. Now, I don't know the statistics. I just used it on a daily basis with people and got a large number of people employed. So I find sometimes the micro, that you didn't get the tax credit unless you employed somebody. So there's nothing that you're going to get money until you do it. And it's kind of like the old story about delivering the prisoners and how they figured out how to get the prisoners from England alive over to Australia. And it was pay when they got there versus shipping them, because they all died on the way. And I'll tell you that story later if you don't know it. But it's an economics, like what drives you economically. And so I think the tax credit's good. I think also everybody's kind of brought up one of our hugest industries that I think we are extremely successful in is higher education. It's an industry we're known for, we're successful for, and yet we continue to cut subsidies for that very industry. And it is impacting us, and it is impacting the reputation of those institutions, which is going to draw people away. And I think that students do come, they spend at least 4 years here, they do spend money here, families move here, if they're going to teach here, they bring other people into the area. And so I kind of see this decision to support a mobile industry versus one that we know is positive, and I just throw that back and how we might look at that. I'm almost out of time, aren't we?
One thing to say is, I'm certainly not suggesting that tax credits are never a useful policy tool. I don't think they are ever a useful policy tool for influencing location decisions of businesses, for influencing who they hire, for influencing whether they put in pollution control stuff. There are lots of things that tax credits are of the right scale to make a difference on. For economic location, for investment location, they aren't the right scale, and that this is all just a question of what is going to empirically work. And my argument isn't sort of a principled one against tax credits; it's just against tax credits when they're not effective.
On that, I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our panelists in particular. You've obviously thought a lot about it, but I know even if you've thought about it before, you have to really get your thoughts in order to do a presentation like this. So even though I said you don't have to prepare, of course you did, and we do very much appreciate that. Thank you very much, Barry, for moderating this. Thank you, Chris, for helping us think about this. And Jennifer, I forgot you in the beginning. I'm so sorry. Jennifer is assisting, but in many ways beyond just helping us organize. She's a thoughtful participant in all of our meetings about who we should get and what we should talk about, and very knowledgeable and helpful. So thank you all. This was a great, I think, beginning seminar. Go tell all your friends how terrific it was. And the next one is on healthcare, access to service, creating access to services, the case of the Massachusetts Healthcare Connector. So that should be a good one. And then we are doing ensuring equal access, the case of broadband access in Western Massachusetts. So we have Judy Dumont coming, who's the director of the Broadband Institute, and Paul Basington, who is the director of state policy for Verizon. So that should also be a good seminar. Thank you all very much for that. John, thank you very much.
This will be up on our website, John?
Yes.
This will be on the School of